recording here. So I think you've already watched the basics there, but for resources, you're going to have a recording of this session. I also, it's going to be a lot of different topics we cover, and I have little short videos of each procedure that you'll get at the end of the course today, and along with a document that has step-by-step instructions. So you can either read the instructions or watch the video or rewatch this recording to finish the assignment. We're going to have a Q&A session, and those will just be a chance for us to, I think that's wrong. It's not next Monday. It's in the email. Whatever I put in the email is correct. I'll check at our break. But the Q&A sessions are just a chance for us to go over any issues you've encountered and other things you have questions about. We'll take a break at the top of the hour for some coffee. And one thing is in QGIS, there's a lot of different ways to define color. So QGIS has this color picker widget that you may have seen as you're working in QGIS. And it's really nice because it allows you to define color by hue, saturation, and value, or by red, green, blue values. So a kind of a review of that. If you have 0, 0, 0 as the values here for red, green, and blue, that would be black. 255, 255, 255 would be white. And then so each one of these RGB sliders goes from 0 to 255, and you can use that to define color. There's also an opacity slider that you can use, and then hexadecimal notation. So if a web designer or someone gives you a hexadecimal color, you can plug that in too. So it's quite nice. And then just a little bit about color theory. It may have been a while since you've thought about this. So that I talked about RGB here, but this hue, saturation, and value is also a nice way to figure out a good color. And so the hue is basically the colors, like, the pure red, pure blue, etc., around the spectrum. And then if we choose one particular color, like pure red, the saturation will be from pure red to white. And then the value would be from black to white. And so this triangle basically then allows you to choose any variation of red that exists. And so you can use the value and the saturation on this dialog here, the value and the saturation to either lighten the color a little bit, darken the color a little bit. So once you start working with this, I think you'll see that it's really a handy way to start figuring out what the best color is for a given task. QGIS has a ton of different renderers, and there's more coming out all the time. We're going to be looking at today some of the point renderers. We're also going to be looking at this one called inverted polygons in combination with shape burst fill. And in the second class, we'll be looking at geometry generators. We're also going to look at hillshade and contour rendering today. Some of these have the symbol layer types shown below keep being added. So at QGIS 324, we had a number of different symbol layer types added, with line burst and raster line. So those are interesting. And now at 326, this one, animated markers, which basically lets you add an animated GIF for a point symbol and control the frame rate of it and things like that. So it's getting quite amazing what you can do in QGIS. So let's get out of that and into QGIS itself. I tried to make the icons a little bit bigger here, so you should be able to see them. And I'm using QGIS version 3.2.2 for this demo. Any version of any of the recent versions of QGIS should work for what we're going to be covering. And so the goal of this course is really just to give you an introduction to all the variety of cartographic and data visualization techniques there are in QGIS. And I think it is probably the area that QGIS has grown the most in recent years. So I'm going to start with showing you how to do label blocking. So I'm going to open up a QGIS project here. So I set up a favorite. Do you both know about favorites in the browser panel? Yeah, so I've got this favorite for the course data. And if I go into the data folder, there is one for Denmark here. I have several subfolders for different topics. And there's a Denmark geo package, and it's possible to save a QGIS project into a geo package. So from the browser panel, if I expand this geo package, I can see there's 2 QGIS projects inside this along with data. Another way to open up a project if it's in a geo package is you go to the project menu. Instead of choosing open, you open from, choose the geo package, and then you simply navigate to that geo package, and QGIS will show you the projects within that particular geo package. So if I go into choose the same Denmark geo package from this dialog, then it will show me the 2 projects here that are available. So I'm going to open up the Denmark project. So again, I can open this project this way, or just by dragging and dropping the Denmark project from here onto the map canvas. And so this opens up a area of kind of southern Denmark where there's a lot of islands, and we're going to be looking at label blocking. So there's already a print composition in this project. So I'm going to go to project layouts and open up the one map layout that exists here. We have a pretty simple map layout here, and why is okay, the title seems to have changed to a very small font from what I had it set to. Let me make that a little more realistic. So there's the map title. So one thing when you're working on a print composition is that you may have spent a lot of time placing labels on the map and settings for labels, and then you may add a title like this, and the title may actually interfere with some of the labels. And so, for example, if I drag this here, the Baltic Sea label is now conflicting with the map title. And so one thing you can do in a print composition to avoid that is select the map object. And then over here on item properties, you have a series of buttons at the top that allow you to control the scale of the current map. But there's also this label settings button. And if I click this label settings button, I have this label blocking section. So I can tell QGIS that the title, Road to Mons Klint, is a label blocking item, meaning that no labels should interfere with that object, that text object. So if I select that, you'll see the Baltic Sea label moves to get out of the way of the title. And you can do that for any of the items in the map. So I could also select the map again, click on label settings, and tell QGIS that the legend is also a label blocking item. So I decide that I want the legend to be up here, then the Baltic Sea again moves out of its way to avoid the conflict. So it's quite simple, but really handy way of just, you can go in and set all the major map objects on a print composition to be label blocking items, and then not have to worry about any of those conflicts on your map. So the other thing we can do in a print composition is we have just the default legend patch shapes here, just a straight line for line features, rectangles for polygons, and then if we had a point layer, it would just be a simple point. But there's now, it's possible to have custom legend patches in QGIS. So if I minimize the print composition and go back to my main map canvas, in QGIS, we have this thing called the Style Manager, which I think is kind of an overlooked feature. If you do a lot of cartography, this can be a really nice tool to familiarize yourself with, because it allows you to organize all your different styles and tag them. So I'm using kind of a default installation of QGIS, so I don't really have any tags that I've added, and I have just the default set of symbols. So this is, I'm on the all tab, but if I go to marker, it'll show me the point symbols that QGIS ships with, the line symbols, polygon, color ramps. And you'll see there's this tab for legend patch shapes. And QGIS doesn't come with a default set, but there has been a community repository created with a nice collection of default legend patch shapes that you can download and import. And you'll see in the directions I'm going to give you, I actually give you just the URL to get to this. But since I wrote the instructions, they've added this browse online styles link here in the style manager, and I can simply click that. It opens up this style repository, plugins.qgis.org/styles. And these are just styles for point, line, polygon, raster that different users have uploaded to QGIS. And for each one, there's a download link that you can use to download that and apply it if you want to use it. So for the style type, you can see there's an entry for legend patch. If I click on that, we have some that people have uploaded. So some are silly, like bite of my sandwich, all the Italian regions. But we're going to use this basic legend patch shapes set right here. So I can simply click the download link to download this. And I'm going to put it into the course folder. Save. There we go. So it's a zip file that just downloaded into the folder I saved it to, so I can extract this. And inside there's this patch XML file, and that will contain, it's an XML style file for QGIS, and that will have all the legend patches. So to bring this into QGIS, now that I've downloaded it, I can simply click on my legend patch shapes tab and choose import items. And I can import from a URL or a file. Here I'm going to choose file since I've downloaded it. And I'm going to go to that same folder and select that XML file. So it shows me a nice set of legend patch shapes that I can use. There's some for roads, some for contours, some for rivers. And you can see that when you, instead of just having a straight line for a river, when you actually have like a stream network or a wavy river on the legend, it's just more intuitive, makes for a nicer map, and it's pretty easy to do. The same goes for roads or building footprints, etc. Or even for points, you can show different clusters of points instead of a single point. So I'm going to select all, and I can choose to add these to my favorites. I can choose to not import embedded tags if I want to. I can enter tags here, which would just be a way for me to organize styles in QGIS. And then I can import. So now I have all those legend patch shapes in QGIS, and I can start using them in my map. So I'm going to close the manager and bring up my print composition again. There's that. And I'll just select my legend now. So for motorway, I can double click on that. And this is, once you've double clicked on it, this is where you can change the text that appears in the legend. But you'll see that down below, there's this patch section. So I can click on that, and choose any of those legend patches that are appropriate for lines that I just installed. So I could choose one of the road symbols for motorway and click the back item. I could then go to the next one, primary. I could choose, I don't know why they didn't end up in favorites, they should have. I could choose, a different road symbol for that. And you'll see that here, this is the expression that's being used to create this particular legend patch. And we're going to look at these expressions in a minute, but QGIS has a lot of geometric expressions. And then, this is just multi-line string with a series of coordinates that create the shape. So you can create your own custom legend patch shapes as well. And then for municipalities, I could go in and choose something and like maybe coast or coast 2, whatever I happen to like. And with these legend patch shapes, you can also change the width and height. So I could go in here and change the settings for the size of the patch until it appears the way I like it to. So next I'm going to show you how to create a legend patch shape from one of the actual features. So there isn't one of those that I just downloaded that I really like for forests. So what I can do is kind of scan my map and see if there's a forest polygon here that looks like something I might want to use. So I'm going to, again, minimize the print composition window and go back to the main map canvas. And, some of these are fairly complex polygons that probably would make a pretty busy legend patch. But this one down here is a pretty regular polygon. So I'm going to choose that one. So to use this as a legend patch shape and import it myself, I simply select the forest layer. I can, whoops. I'm going to select that one feature. I actually don't have to put it in edit mode. I just have to select that feature. And then on the digitizing toolbar, now that I have that selected feature, the copy features button becomes active. So I can copy this selected feature to my clipboard. And then what I can do is open up the style manager, go to legend patch shapes, and click this plus button to create a fill legend patch shape. And this little dialog opens with kind of just a placeholder for an expression, just a rectangle. So I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to hit Control V to paste in the feature that I just copied to my clipboard. And it turns into a fairly busy, expression with all the coordinates for that. And so we need to do a little bit of editing to this to clean it up, because it also comes with all the attribute fields. So if I scroll up to the top here, I can see the beginning of the geometric function of the feature, multi-polygon Z with all the coordinates. So you're always going to see this. It might be a line function, it might be a polygon function, might be a point function, but you want the expression to start with that. So everything above that are the attribute column names for this layer. So I can highlight those and just delete them so that I'm starting with multi-polygon Z. So I just want the geometry of this. And then at the end, there are also values for those attribute fields. And so I can highlight everything up to the closing parentheses and just have the geometry for that polygon. So now I can click Save Legend Patch Shape. I can give it a name, Forest. I can add it to a favorites. I can tag this. I could tag it as Forest and click Save. Click OK. So now I have this Forest legend patch shape based on my feature, which is pretty cool. So now I can go back into my print composition and choose that forest element in my legend, click on shape, and choose that forest patch that I just created. And now I have a nice legend patch shape that resembles an actual feature on the map. And I can, again, change the width and height. And, you know, it ends up looking almost exactly like the forest right there that someone sees on the map. And so that can be just a really nice way to put your map above what most other people are creating.
Can I have a question?
Of course.
I can see that. Where do you see or where did you set up the fill of the shape to be with those trees?
Ah, yeah. Okay.
Because I can see that like the shape that's very clear how you made it. That is actually very cool. I had no idea that works, but I see that it's still shape, the fill of the shape still look the same as you had it before when it was rectangle.
Oh yeah, so you're talking about,
and that is just automatically because you already had it there. Oh, in the map, so it just stays automatically the same fill. So basically what you are changing in the legend is just the shape.
Correct.
And the fill stays the same as it is on the map.
Correct.
Okay, got it.
So all I'm doing is changing it from a rectangle to a forest patch.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks.
And with that, oops. For this forest layer, and I don't know if you're probably aware of this layer styling panel. This is the best way to change symbols in QGIS. So if I open up this, click this paintbrush button or F7, I open up this layer styling panel. So this symbol was created with a simple fill and then a random marker fill. And the random marker fill is using, instead of a simple marker, an SVG marker for a tree. So that's the way this is set up. And so, you know, with these random marker fills, there's different settings that you can tweak to adjust, in this case, the density of trees and polygons and things like that. So you have this project in your data, so you can open it up and see how that worked.
Cool. So, you know, when you took like the polygon coordinates and it's in the reference system of your project.
Mm.
If you were just in a different reference system, like in degrees, does it not matter for the patch? It kind of it will just like normalize the coordinates so that it always, is that ever a problem?
No, it's never a problem with these legend patch shapes. It's just defining the shape. And so the coordinates for the legend patch shape could be in any CRS, and it's not going to change the way QGIS interprets it. It's just defining the shape.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so again, just in this style manager, if I go to legend patch shapes and choose all, some of these didn't end up as favorites, but you know, you can select all of these and right click and choose add to favorites. And now they're listed. When I click favorites, they're in there. You can also, on a symbol in QGIS, you can right click on it and add a tag or clear tags, remove the item. You can actually edit the item here too. So you can edit the geometry, copy the item. So you get a lot of little options here when you right click on something, and you can create your own set of tags to easily find things. You could have symbols by project, for example. And there's also text format and label settings. So text format would be maybe the font and size and style of a title font for all your maps for a particular project, and maybe this, you know, other styles for other things. So you can save those text formats and manage them here just the way you do layer symbols. Label settings also includes placement options and things like that. All the different settings you get with labels will be stored as part of that style. So you can also manage and keep and save label settings in addition to text formats. So okay, so next we're going to change into looking at live layer effects. So I'm going to open up a new project. It's in the layer effects folder, and it's this bathymetry. So this is some data from the online repository Natural Earth. And it's a series of bathymetry layers that just, have the depth of the ocean from deepest to shallowest, from anywhere from, I think it starts at 200 meters deep down to 10,000 meters deep, this is global. So I think that must be the Marianas Trench in the Pacific or something. So layer effects basically allow you to create these different like drop shadows, inner shadows, outer glows, etc. on your vector features, and they can just help enhance a map. Like the simplest cases, if you have like a point feature or a polygon feature and you have a busy background, you might add an outer glow to accentuate that feature or lift it off the busy background, or a drop shadow to do that. But you can do even more interesting things with these, and you'll find them under layer rendering for a particular layer. So if I expand layer rendering, I will see this draw effects option here. So if I enable draw effects, the little star lights up, and I can go in here and choose one of the different options here. So you can see I've already set the effect for each one of these layers. I just had to enable it to see it on the map, and it's an inner shadow. So you see, if I uncheck and check this, you'll see near the coast of the US over here, you'll see kind of a little drop shadow appear as I enable this. And if I move to the next one, the next layer, and enable draw effects, you'll start seeing this interesting kind of 2.5D depth effect appearing on the map. And this is simply done by applying an inner shadow to each one of these bathymetry polygon layers. So this is just one use case and one example of how you can do some pretty interesting things with layer effects if you start experimenting with them. So now that I've enabled it for all the ocean depths that we get here in the Atlantic Basin, we get this really nice kind of pseudo 3D appearance to the bathymetry. This can be really nice. Even an inner shadow for a lake layer can also be quite nice, even if it's just a single polygon like that. Another thing we're going to look at shortly is blending modes. And actually, I don't. This is a different project, so I won't do that. Forget that. So this is just one use case of these layer effects. And again, if I go back into this effects properties panel, the source that's checked here is the styling of the layer itself. So if I turn off source, it's actually going to turn off that particular source symbology, and all you'll have is the inner shadow. So that can be kind of an interesting thing. You always have that option of just having the effect without the feature. And there are actually these four, inner and outer glow, and inner shadow and drop shadow, are the most commonly used. So there's the four that are listed here, and these have been here for quite a while. So this is kind of a dated graphical user interface. And there's actually more down below here. So I could choose inner glow and replace that with colorize, for example. So you see colorize is there now. And so importantly, it will replace whichever one you've chosen. So I could now replace colorize with blur or transform. Transform actually lets you rotate features and move them, displace them. So there's a lot of different options in here. And so just be aware that you can do more than inner and outer glows and drop shadows. There's a bigger list down below. Another example is that, let me open up this project. This is another map project stored in a geo package. There's in the layer effects folder, a DK Coast geo package. And inside that, there's this DK Coast QGIS project. So I'm going to open up this project. So there's this thing called the 30-day map challenge. It happens each November. I don't know if you've seen this on social media, but last year I participated in the whole thing, and I had just moved to Denmark. So I was kind of just considering the fact that anywhere in Denmark, you're remarkably close to a coast. And so I made this series of internal buffers. So I did a multiple ring buffer around Denmark with 5-kilometer internal buffers, and then just styled it from light blue to dark blue. So pretty basic. And then I was thinking it would be kind of interesting to see what I could do with different layer effects. And so if I go down here to layer rendering and select draw effects and choose a drop shadow, it's going to put a drop shadow under the entire layer, basically. So it's not going to put a drop shadow under each individual multi-ring polygon, but under the layer as a whole. But you have an option in QGIS to apply these layer effects at the class level. So for each one of these classes here. So in QGIS here, this button next to symbol, this is kind of the master symbol button where I can change characteristics of each one of these 10 classes simultaneously. So for example, I could put a stroke, a solid stroke around each one. And instead of doing each one individually, I can click this symbol button and I can go in and change them all simultaneously. So if I select simple fill, for example, I could choose a stroke and put a white line around each one of those. But what I'm going to do is draw effects at the class level. So I'm going to choose the draw effects, select the draw effects option down here and click the star to open it up. And I'm going to choose drop shadow. And I get this really crazy visualization. And so what I did in the end was decide instead of taking the defaults for drop shadow, it was a little severe. So I can knock down the value for the length of the shadow, and the blur radius too is kind of how broad the shadow is, and I could reduce that too to make the effect a little more subtle. And I get this really interesting rendering to depict the distance to the Danish coast. I was kind of just exploring when I did this, and I first tried inner shadow. And this creates a really crazy visual. So sometimes it's a good exercise just to try these on different data sets to see what happens, because sometimes something kind of spectacular and unexpected can happen when you start playing around with these effects, and you can achieve some pretty nice things. You'll see there's like this little artifact around some of the islands. And interestingly enough, that it's kind of like sometimes this happens with these effects, and it's something that won't actually happen if you export the image. So if I open up the print composition for this, you won't see that strange rectangular artifact around the little islands and things. It's a clean look.
Yeah, that's a very cool map. It's actually the thing that sold me on this particular course. I saw this on the advert page.
Oh, cool.
I thought I want to do that. So here I am.
You do it for the UK. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So another thing you can use these for, this is an example of kind of neon cartography. Sometimes people call these lightsaber maps too. And let me drag this in. Oh, sorry. PowerPoint is being strange. Okay, there we go. So this is just some flight lines, and I used an outer glow, in this case around the flight lines, to create this kind of neon effect. And when you're using an outer glow, the outer glow default is just a white glow around it, and you can make it semi-transparent or use these things called blending modes that we're going to look at. But you can also use a color ramp. So here I used a color ramp from pink to black. And so you can always do that from the feature color to whatever color the background map is, to kind of create these kind of neon effects with an outer glow. You can also use that kind of outer glow to do this kind of thing, which was UFO sightings in Denmark. I did for last year's 30-day map challenge too. I simply have an outer glow of green around Denmark and the same kind of outer glow around the little SVG icons for aliens. So
did you make this up, or is it based on some kind of data?
it's actually real. There is an international UFO data set you can Google and find. And I was kind of thought it was fascinating because actually there's only like 27 or something like that. I don't remember the number, but in the history of Denmark in this database, there's only like 27 reported UFO sightings. But in the UK, it's huge, thousands, which is right next door. So I don't know.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's some use cases of the outer glow. So the outer glow here, the default is it's a single color, and you can control the spread, which is the width of it, and the blur radius and the opacity, but you could choose color ramp instead. And so that's another option you have with this, is to use a color ramp for an outer glow from one color to another.
Back on that aliens data set you showed us,
Yeah.
there was a conditional coloring for it just inside of the Danish borders. Is that something you did to the feature itself, or is it like was it a quick legend thing?
Yeah, so I think I could do it here. So here, if I just choose just a single symbol color for Denmark, and this will have that. Yeah. To turn off draw fix. Hold on. There's also a nice undo here. Let me go in here and undo that effect. Okay. Now I will just change this to a single symbol. It's not going to quite be the same, but all I did was I went down to layer rendering, turned on draw effects, and chose outer glow. And I chose a color ramp. And so for the color ramp, I chose this option instead of one of the existing ones, create new color ramp, and a gradient color ramp. And I just chose kind of like, let's say, white to green. And I used a very kind of neon green like that. And then I get this, or I guess actually, to be more correct, edit color ramp. The second color was use this pick color option and pick the background of the map so it blends into the sea. And there's a little better, but that's basically what I did. So now you have this green glow around the map. And
yeah,
so and
yeah, and for the alien heads, because they were green inside the borders and then like white outside of the borders. Was that something you also did in this symbology here, or was it just
yeah, it was the same, basically the same thing. I used an SVG icon, and then I used this an outer glow around the SVG icon.
Okay, cool.
So it was two uses of the outer glow with the same color.
Oh, but you had one layer for the symbology for the UFOs in Denmark, and another layer for those in Sweden.
Yeah, I think I may have I think there was a country attribute in there. So I think I styled, I just classified them based on Denmark and
Yeah.
Sweden and used 2 different symbols.
Yeah.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
And if you follow the 30-day map challenge on Twitter or now Mastodon or LinkedIn or whatever, you'll see a lot of really cool maps. It's fun. It's fun to follow. Basically every day there's a theme. So like for the alien one, the theme was green. So I did something green. So what we're going to look at next is elevation data and what you can do to visualize elevation data. So I have a Mount Rainier project. Which basically just has this one single DEM of Mount Rainier. So this is a really tall volcano in Washington State in the US, kind of between Portland and Seattle. And it's quite tall, 4,000 meters high. And it's makes for a nice visualization. So that's why I've chosen it. So first off, I can, instead of using the black to white color ramp for a DEM, I can choose the option single band pseudo color. And that allows me to choose a different color ramp for the elevations. And for the color ramp here, I can choose any of the color ramps that ship with QGIS, but I can also choose, again, this option, like I just showed you, to create a new color ramp. Because there's kind of a hidden pool of color ramps that come with QGIS. I just use gradient to do that green ramp, but I'm going to choose, in this case, another option, this CPT City. This is a collection of color ramps that ship with QGIS that are kind of hidden in this little catalog. So click OK. And this color ramp window opens up. And it has all these color ramps by category, bathymetry, greens, and you'll see there's one for topography. So since I have an elevation data set, I can pick one of the topography color ramps. I've always kind of been fond of CDA and SDA. They're both nice. So I can choose one of these and click OK. And then I'm going to click the classify button. And it will stretch my data using that particular color ramp. If you like this color ramp, you can keep it by clicking on the color ramp dropdown. And at the bottom, there's this thing to save the color ramp. So again, this is going to save it into my style manager. So I can call it, I'll just call it SDA. And I can put it into tag it with something or create a new tag. And I can choose add to favorites. And if I add it to favorites, it's going to show up as one of these color ramps in the drop-down menu. So I can click save. And now I will see SDA in that list, and I can just easily use it. So another thing I can do to make this a little nicer is duplicate this layer by right-clicking on it and choose duplicate. I'll put this at the top and turn it on. So I just have another copy of it, and I can rename this Hillshade. And instead of a single band pseudo color renderer for Hillshade, I can choose the Hillshade renderer. And it renders the elevation as a hillshade. Down here, there's this resampling section, and the default on a new installation of QGIS is usually nearest neighbor by nearest neighbor. And I don't know, I hope if on Zoom you can see, but there's kind of some striping in the DEM that starts to appear. You can see kind of that gridded nature.
Yeah. Yeah. We
And
can
if
see that.
I choose bilinear, it will smooth the rendering out and take that away. So I usually choose bilinear for the zoomed in, zoomed out resampling here. So now we have these two layers, the hillshade and the DEM with colors. So I can make a nice color hillshade. I could choose to reduce the opacity of this hillshade so that I can see the colored DEM through it. But this is kind of old school. This, if I make this too transparent, I start losing the detail in the hillshade, but I get more color, but the colors are kind of washed out even in the best happy spot there. So it's much better to use a blending mode. So the blending modes are here under layer rendering. I can choose, instead of normal, multiply. And now I have a fantastic color hillshade image, just because I'm blending the top layer with the one below. So these blending modes come into, there's different categories. This is the lighten list here. Where's my notes on that? So you have a lighten group, a darken group, an overlay group, and then these difference and subtract. And so, the ones in a given group will be similar. So sometimes it's useful to try different ones. The one that always gets used for this situation to create a color hillshade is multiply. It's the best one for that use case. You can try others to see what they would do. Some of them turn into pretty funky visuals. So in this case, we're just going to use multiply. And what I can do then is right click and make another copy of this layer. Drag this to the top, and I'm going to rename this one contours. And I'll turn it on and get a very dark image because now I have two hillshades stacked on top of one another. But I'm going to change this contours layer to a contour renderer. And this input downscaling, sometimes the contours won't show up right away. I usually reduce that to 1, and then you get your contours to appear on the map. And so you can see the default contour interval is 100 and 500 for the index contours. So you have to adjust these to your study area. They happen to work well for this data set, but I can click on the symbol for the contours, and I could make this one a little thicker since it's the index contours. So I can see every 5 contour lines, I get that index contour. And you can also apply blending modes to these. If I put this back at normal for this layer, I'll see those black contour lines. But for contour lines, you can try some other blending modes. For example, overlay. And here you still see the contours, but they are kind of blending into the colors of the hillshade, which is kind of cool. Soft light can sometimes work well. It all looks almost exactly the same. Hard light. So you can try some of these different blending modes in here to see which one gives you the nicest effect. But with really just a few clicks, we've gone from just a straight DEM to a really nice rendering of the terrain in QGIS.
What's really striking is that it looks kind of like high definition, whereas even though it's like the same definition as like a flat layer, it just looks like you're looking at like a very nicely, almost like a CGI image or something. But it's kind of it's shocking how easy it is to produce.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, I think another one I have in my notes that can work for this is the addition for those contours. Kind of makes them white. So it's always good to experiment with these and just see what effect you get with different blending modes with different data sets and see which one. I like this because it kind of makes the contour lines there, but they're kind of subtle. There is some documentation on the QGIS webpage that I give you about these blending modes, and they give you descriptions of each one. So they multiply the pixel values of the top item are multiplied with the corresponding values from the bottom item. And all of these blending modes are standard algorithms that you'll find in Adobe Photoshop and Illustrator and other graphic software like GIMP and Inkscape. And these have just been implemented in QGIS quite a long while ago. And these blending modes are also available in a print composition. So if I have a print layout in here. QGIS. So here's my map, and I have this logo in here made with QGIS. And any item in your print composition, if you go down to the renderings section of item properties for that, you'll see blending modes. So blending modes are available in other applications in QGIS. So I could apply a multiply blending mode to this logo, and it will strip the white out. And you can try others. If I choose addition, it turns the logo white. So you don't necessarily have to have a special version of a logo with the white stripped out for different applications. You can simply use these blending modes in QGIS to do different things with them. And some of these create some pretty interesting effects with logos.
I feel so stupid. I have done so many of these already with like the different versions of logo, then imported it again, and I never knew that is a much easier option.
Yeah. And so that same is even for something like a legend. Any item in the print composition, you can scroll down to the rendering section, and you're going to see the blending mode option available there, as well as opacity. So you could apply the blending mode to the legend. It's mostly that doesn't work, but just be aware that it's always there, and there may be cases where those are super useful. Let's see, I'm going to show you, we're going to finish up blending modes, and then we'll take a quick coffee break. So the other cool thing you can do with blending modes is, so here we have a raster layer. If we have a vector layer, we have the choice of applying the blending mode at the layer level or at the feature level. So I'm going to open up a new project. And yeah, under blending, this DK Roads project. So this is just a map of this Copenhagen, Denmark here. So this is Denmark, and this is just OpenStreetMap roads. And the roads are just given a dark blue here. So nothing fancy going on here. If I expand layer rendering, I can see there's a blending mode for the layer or for the features. So if you think about the color model, where black is 0, 0, 0, white is 255, 255, 255. And if we use the addition blending mode at the feature level, all these blue lines around Copenhagen, the symbols are thick enough that those roads at this scale are all stacked on top of one another. And if we apply a blending mode at the feature level, and specifically addition, it's going to add those RGB values up on any case where those layers are stacked on top of one another. So at a certain point where there's a bunch of roads stacked, the color is going to be 255, 255, 255, or white. So if I do this, I basically get a rendering of road density doing that. And this is kind of the title slide of the course. And so this is scale dependent. We're not actually able to measure road density. It's just kind of a rendering of road density. So if I zoom into Copenhagen, fewer roads at this scale are stacked, so the visual changes a little bit. But that's another interesting use case for these. All of these are kind of data dependent, and this works best if you're using a dark background, for example. So it won't work for all use cases, but it can work for a lot of them. And then so another example of doing that, this was a map of 24 hours of ship traffic around Denmark. And I basically did the same thing, but instead of it being roads, it's shipping lanes. And you see the density of shipping lanes essentially with exactly the same procedure using a feature blending mode. So that's feature blending mode. Just a quick example of that. It's very easy to do. So sometimes with just a couple clicks, you can really create a map that's kind of special and set apart from the rest. So let's take a 10-minute break and we'll come back at 15 after. I'll pause the recording.
Hello, Kurt.
Hi. So yeah, I dredged up the alien project so I could show you guys what I did.
Oh, great.
And in the chat, I posted the data source for it. So yeah, Blanca, I was just telling Kane, you guys seem to be interested in the UFO project, so I found it so we could look at it. And the data source for this I posted in the chat. Kaggle.com, UFO sightings around the world data set. And so yeah, so for the countries here, yeah. If I expand layer rendering, you can see that draw effects is turned on. And if I check that, it is an outer glow. Oh, it's just a single color for the, so I didn't actually use a color ramp for the outer glow. I just used a single color. So that's interesting. It looks like maybe I'd reduce the spread a little bit. I think the default is 2. So that's that. And then for the UFOs, it looks like I did that kind of is a good segue into the next section, which is point renderers. There's this renderer called point displacement that I apparently used because I think some of these sightings were so stacked on top of one another that I created the SVG icon symbology, and then I switched to the point displacement renderer so I could separate them a little bit so you could see them. So this is what we're going to be talking about next, is ways to render points. And this is one option you have when you have really tightly clustered points. And of course, you have to be careful with it because you're moving the data from its actual location. But the upside is that the map reader actually sees that there's more data there than they thought. So for example, these 2 alien heads may have been stacked on top of one another, and with the point displacement renderer, I can just separate them a little bit so you can see them both. This is one option for dealing with tightly clustered points cartographically. And so this point displacement renderer, you can set up symbology for a layer and then switch to this. The render settings here is going to be how I set up that original symbology. So you can see it's a marker using an SVG marker symbol layer type. So I just set the fill color, and if you ever need SVG symbols, a really good source for these is the Noun project. Get this, put this in the chat too. It's a really nice searchable repository of different SVG icons that I use a lot. So that's where I found the alien head, I'm pretty sure. And depending on how you've installed QGIS, these, do you guys know where SVG icons sit in QGIS? If you are, I use the OSGeo for Windows installer. So if I go to my C drive, I can see OSGeo for Windows. So that's the installation directory. And if I go into apps, then I'll find QGIS. This would be the latest release. So right now that's 3.2.8. This is the folder for the LTR, which is 3.2.2 right now. And if I double click in there, I'll see an SVG folder. And you can put as many in here as you want. You can create your own folders. So here I have one called noun. And so you can see all these different noun project SVG icons that I've put in there. So anything I add in here will be searchable in the layer styling panel. So that's where they are. You can either have them in the LTR folder or the standard QGIS folder for SVGs, depending on which version of QGIS you want them to be available for. Oh, here's the folder for alien. Yep, noun alien. So that's where they live, and then you will be able to find them here in the SVG browser. The SVG browser also is searchable now, so you can type search words down here to browse for different symbols. So if I search for tree, I see all the ones for that have tree as a keyword. And then back here at the main renderer, if I expand layer rendering, you'll see that draw effects is enabled. And I use an outer glow around the alien heads. It's the exact same setting as the national boundary. So I use the exact same setting for the outer glow for the SVG icons and the polygon. So that's it. So we are switching gears into rendering points, like I said. So I'm going to open up a new project. There's a points folder. I'm going to open up this points project. So this has place names from OpenStreetMap for the country of Denmark on a dark background. And so these are certainly stacked, you know, and one nice trick in QGIS, if you want to know the feature count of a layer, you can right click on it and choose show feature count from the context menu. So I have 7,000 places here, and you can see if I zoom in, they're pretty tightly clustered in some locations. So one option I have for dealing with this is choosing one of these renderers. So I could choose, for example, point cluster, and point cluster will put another symbol wherever more than one point symbol stacks on top of another with the number of the features clustered at that location. And so you get a cluster symbol, which is wherever they're clustered, and this is composed of a font marker and a simple marker. So I can go in here and you know, change the font for that. I can change the size of the font, and then the simple marker would control the color of the point. So I could, you know, make it a green like the rest of the things and change the font to black. So you can set that up to look however you need it to. And you'll see these little icons to the right of all these inputs to a symbol are really important. We're going to look at these more next time. These are data-defined overrides. Have either of you worked with these before? So these are kind of unlock the secret power in QGIS, because QGIS has this huge expression engine. So instead of just pointing to or just choosing a font, for example, you could write an expression or choose if maybe you had an attribute column in your data set that listed fonts, and you could point to that attribute column so that it would use whatever font was listed for each feature, for example, or a field that had font size. So if we go down here to characters, you can see there's a little, this data defined override is yellow and it has this little expression icon. So this is how this cluster symbol is being created, because this is the character that's being put for the font marker. So if I look at this, we can see what the expression is. If I click edit, it opens up the expression window, and it's using this variable called cluster size. That's how it's able to and so you can look up what this variable does. I can search. Where is it? I'm pulling that up. Cluster size. Number of symbols contained within a cluster. So the variables are listed down below here in the expression engine. And so that's all this is doing, is using this variable that ships with QGIS to count the number of features stacked and put that as the font marker. So that's a really nice use of a data-defined override that this renderer uses. Another option we have here is to create like a heat map. So I'm going to right click on this and duplicate the layer. And I'll call this one heat map. And I'm going to change this from point cluster to heat map. And what heat map does is it renders the points as a raster heat map. So there are algorithms in QGIS for generating heat maps, but this is a quick way to just render points as a heat map to show density. So I can choose a different color ramp, spectral, and with any color ramp, you can always also choose to invert the color ramp. So here it's going from blue to red, and it looks like the highest densities are being shown in blue, and I'd rather have them be red, so I can invert the color ramp, do a more intuitive rendering of the high density. You have a search radius, so you can choose different search radiuses to how far QGIS goes out in millimeters on the map, from, in this case, to search for more points. The bigger your search radius, the slower the rendering will be, because QGIS has to do all that calculation. And you have different units that you could use for this. You could use meters at scale for your coordinate system that you're using, for example. You also have this rendering quality. If you choose fastest, it will be basically a coarser raster that gets created. If you choose best, it's going to create a finer raster that's going to take longer to render. And reduce the radius down to 10, so we're not waiting here forever. You can see the QGIS is thinking and calculating this. Since it's creating a finer raster, it takes a little bit longer. And so we could then use a blending mode with this too. So this is nice for heat maps. Often you could choose a multiply blending mode. I'm going to switch this back to average quality so it's faster. And that doesn't really work, but you can play around with different blending modes to try to find something that does. And in some cases, it may be that no blending mode is really going to work. You may just have to use layer opacity. That's kind of interesting. Hard light. So you have to just experiment with these things to see what's going to work for you. You can also just use the opacity slider. Sometimes that works better. And then you can also weight the points. So here we have a population column associated with these places. So instead of just counting the raw number of features, we could weight the heat map by population. So it's going to use that population. And of course, Copenhagen really pops out because most of these other towns are quite a bit smaller. So I think this is just a nice rendering tool for points because you can quickly experiment and see what a heat map might look like even if you intend to create one long term, you can just render this as a heat map initially to see what the data look like as a heat map. And then if we duplicate this again, we could try point displacement. And change this to a point displacement renderer. This, let me put the opacity back at 100%. So this is kind of a crazy renderer. It has a lot of options and you have to tweak a lot of things usually to get it to be useful. So there's different placement methods, ring, which is the default, concentric rings, and grid. And for each of these, there's these displacement lines that are intended to show how far the feature is being displaced from its actual location. I find they're kind of distracting. So I usually make those, no stroke width and just kind of eliminate them from the map. But that's up to you. If I choose ring, the default, I also have a displacement distance I can experiment with. And so usually I like to be kind of conservative with this myself, just so I'm not making up data and moving things too far. You kind of want that balance of moving the features enough so that the density is evident without being too crazy about it. And if you click on render settings, that's where you can just change the color of the actual marker. And you'll see I changed them to green. And there's a red symbol in there, and that's the center symbol. So that's where the point actually lies. So again, you either just make this transparent and don't use it, or make it the same color as the other points, or maybe there's a case where you want the center symbol to be there so people can see that these 2 points were moved, but the actual location was in between them. So you can experiment with all those settings. This one, like I said, usually takes quite a while to set up and use well. But there are certainly cases where it's handy. Okay, so any questions on those point renderers?
So this displacement one, it's kind of, it makes a ring of points around the center point just when they're all stacked on top of each other.
Correct.
That's its thing.
Yeah.
So you've zoomed in enough now, so every point can sort of have its own.
Yeah. So you can play with the distance that ring spreads. And so, yeah, we're seeing like the red points are where those truly lie, and they're being moved out based on the settings that I included. And you can see that's kind of weird over there. And then, it may be that some of the other placement methods are better for you than ring. That makes sense.
Yeah, it does. No, it seems like just a tricky. That would be like a tricky rendering method to get right.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it really is. Takes a lot of time to configure, even just to decide if you want the actual center symbol along with displaced points, or how you want to handle that. And it kind of depends on the application you're using it in, I suppose. I think like for the aliens, I think I chose to not include the center symbol. I think I just, I think I either made it, maybe I actually even used, I think I probably just reduced the size to nothing so that they didn't show. Something like that in that case, but yeah, you kind of have to decide in each case what is the best solution for showing what you want the map reader to see. You know, that's kind of the key with all of this, is trying to find a way to focus the map reader's attention on the trend in the data, or the thing that you want them to see right away. And so all these techniques are there to basically make that as intuitive and eye-catching as possible. So and you know, every, you know, very different maps for internally within your organization versus creating one for the general public, and or for a conference. And so there's you know, all the context of the map certainly always have to come first, and then some of these techniques might really help depending on what the situation is. So that's obvious, but so the last thing we're going to look at this morning is coastal effects, because we can do some interesting things with building maps for where a coastline is there. And so we're going to go into the Denmark folder, and this is this coastlines project here. So this is kind of this part of Denmark where there's kind of an archipelago of islands. So it's handy for this kind of thing. So the first technique we're going to try is just called an inverted polygon shape burst fill. So it's a mouthful, but it's combining with, there's a renderer for polygons, it's inverted polygons, and it basically will render the data as the inverse of what it is. And then, so if I, for example, I'm going to have this municipalities layer, and if I right click on this and create a duplicate copy and rename this copy water and turn it on, it's just my municipalities still, obviously. But what I can do is, instead of a single symbol renderer, choose this one, inverted polygons. And this will make the islands equal to the sea, basically. I turn off the original municipalities. Now I have the municipalities basically rendered as water, because it's using that inverted polygons renderer. And what I can then do is select the simple fill component of this. And instead of it being simple fill, I can change it to a shape burst fill. So now I'm rendering the municipalities as an inverted polygon shape burst fill. And of course, it's still using the same brown colors, so it's kind of ugly. So I'm going to change the colors, first of all, to something that's more water-like. So I'm going to use some specific RGB values here. So I'm going to choose 166 for red, 206 for green, and 227 for blue. And that gives me this kind of nice dark blue color. And then for the second color in the two color method, I'm going to choose a very light blue. So this is going to be 225, 255, 255. And I have a dark blue to a light blue. So that creates the water. Looks a little more like water now. And with the shape burst fill, you have some really cool options. So instead of in this shading style section next, instead of the whole shape, you can choose set distance, and this will choose the distance away from the polygon edge that the colors fade from one to another. So I can choose set distance, and now it's the default is 5 millimeters. So now 5 millimeters away from the coast, the colors shift from one color to the next. So I can increase this to have that spread be a little bigger. And then below that, there's this blur strength, and the blur strength will control how smoothly those two colors blend into one another. So if I increase the blur strength value, it'll be a smoother gradient. So I can, start increasing this, and you'll see it kind of gets a little fuzzier or smoother as I increase this. So I'm going to set this all the way up to 15. The max is 18. So I'm going to put the slider right there about 15. I kind of like the way that looks. So very quickly, within a couple of clicks, without having any data for water, we've made this really nice visual of the sea around these islands. So that's a pretty quick effect to create. And you can do the same thing for, to render lakes, for example, and things like that. This same inverted polygon shape versus fill technique can also be really useful for a study area boundary. So if you have, so for example, if I go to layer, if I create a study area boundary, and I'm going to make it a polygon, and I'll put it into same CRS and click OK. And then just quickly create a polygon here. I can use this same technique to do something like this, where I make this an inverted polygon, and then I choose shape burst fill, and I make this like gray to white with a little set distance. Play with that a little bit. You can kind of make this as severe as you want, and then I can adjust like the opacity of
This actually
this.
looks amazing, by the way. I love the style of this. I can definitely see this like being a really cool effect on some maps.
Yeah, so I
Or
love
like a
this.
PowerPoint presentation or something, like, so this, like, I can definitely see the use of this.
Yeah, I love this study area boundary effect because I'm using the inverted polygon. So I'm basically styling everything outside my study area, and I'm giving it this little shape burst fill, which kind of makes it almost look like a drop shadow all the way around. And if I make it semi-transparent, I can still see the background, but the study area kind of pops to the front. So that's the other really common use case for this effect. Boom.
Are you then able to just export these inverted polygons and then save it?
Oh yeah, so I created a temporary scratch layer, right? Is that what you're asking? So this little icon indicates that I've created it's a temporary scratch layer. So this will go away when I close QGIS, but I can right click on this and choose make permanent and save it to a geo package or shapefile or whatever.
Yeah, and the same for this like water layer.
Oh, well, the water layer is just the municipalities. So that's just symbology for the municipalities, basically. But I can go down here and save. So now that I've done this, I can save this symbol, and I could call it inverted polygon in shape burst fill IPSF water, and say that's a showcase style, and click save. So now that will be in my symbology manager. It should be. Yep, there it is. So now I can just reuse that on other layers, other projects. These symbols, by the way, do you know about QGIS profiles?
Don't think so.
So see, this says data viz November here. It's because I wanted a clean profile with nothing in here. And so if I go to settings, user profile, you can see I have a lot of user profiles in here. So you'll be using the default profile if you've never set anything, but you can create different profiles for different projects and needs. So the profile stores all your symbols, all your plugins, language. I have one for the Danish language, for example, that puts QGIS into a Danish language interface. So you can create different profiles for different reasons, but you have to be aware that your symbology is stored in there. So if you open up a new profile, symbols you saved in a previous profile will not be there. But they can be helpful ways to manage all your QGIS settings. So if you're teaching someone something, and I often just start a new profile so that I have a clean slate. Also, if you ever run into a QGIS bug, something seems funky, and you're not sure what's happening, the first thing to try to troubleshoot it is start a new profile and see if it's happening. And if it solves the problem, it means that there's something that got corrupted or funky in your profile, maybe a plugin that was behaving badly or something like that. So just a good QGIS troubleshooting technique. So the last thing we're going to look at is there's another coastal effect that cartographers used to do, like in the 50s and 60s, called Ben Ray dots. And those are actually like, you know, the technology to print pictures in a newspaper where you see all the little dots if you magnify it. It's kind of based on that. So I'm going to duplicate this municipalities layer again. I'm going to just call this dots. And I'm going to turn off this water layer above for now. Turn on dots. And I'm going to use the same inverted polygon trick here. And instead of a shape burst fill, this time I'm going to choose point pattern. This option for point pattern fill. So again, just notice all the options you have in here. You know, so for example, if you need to show outlines of polygons, you can choose outline simple line, outline marker line, hashed line, outline arrow, all these things that will just render that as different kinds of outlines. Raster image fill will allow you to fill polygons with raster images. There's random marker fill, point pattern fill. So you have all these different options in here. So I'm going to choose inverted polygons, point pattern fill. So now it's filling the sea outside the municipalities with a random grid of dots. And at the point pattern fill level of my symbol hierarchy, I have some settings here where I can choose the horizontal and vertical distance of these. So I'm going to set these to, instead of 15, 1.5. And the C is just going to become a grid of red points for a second here. And there's also these displacement settings. So instead of it being a perfectly regular grid, I want it to be kind of staggered like bricks. So I want to enter a little horizontal offset. So I'm going to do 0.75. You don't really see that do anything yet. So next I'm going to work on the simple marker and make them something a little nicer to look at. So first I'm going to make them much smaller. And you can see that the horizontal displacement, maybe, I don't know how well it shows up here, but the points are not perfectly regular. There's one line is kind of displaced from the other. So they get kind of stacked like bricks on a building. And I'm going to change the color of this. I'm going to make it the same dark blue that I had just used. And I'm going to give it a stroke style of no pen. So now I have the C just as a kind of array of kind of faint small blue dots. So another option you have in QGIS, if you haven't done this, there's this little green plus button here. So if I choose the point pattern fill component, I can hit this green plus button to add a new symbol layer to my symbol. So the default is always going to be a simple fill. So it adds a simple fill. So now I have a simple fill and a point pattern fill as part of my symbol. And you can add as many of these as you need, and you can even rearrange them with these up and down buttons. So I don't want simple fill though. I want to use the shape burst fill. So I'm going to change this to shape burst fill. And I'm going to make the first color transparent. There's a little trick here. I want this first color to be transparent. And I've noticed it. Sometimes I have to change this to first white and then transparent for it to really become transparent. That might be a bug in QGIS. I don't know why that is, but I have it in the instructions. So just be aware of that. I'm going to keep the second color as white. And then I'm going to again choose this set distance option. And I'm going to set the distance. I'm going to reduce it a little bit from that default of 5 down to 3. And crank up the blur strength all the way to 18. I'm going to put this above water, I think. And so already this is kind of a subtle effect that's kind of interesting that may work, but we can make it a little better by turning on the water layer. And I'm going to turn on a blending mode for this dots layer. What is it? Multiply. So a layer blending mode of multiply. It blends my dots with the shape burst fill below. And now I get kind of this kind of stippling effect near the coast. So that's another way to do a coastline.
That looks really good. When you do the blending and it's something like the multiply, how does it know which layer to mix with? Say if you had like multiple versions of this, how would it know which one to do it with?
So since I have the multiply blending mode on this dots layer, it means that dots will be blended with anything below it. So it's not really going to work for municipalities because dots is that data but inverted, so they don't overlap. So there's nothing blended. So it's only blending with the water layer below it in this case. Yeah.
And then say, for instance, if you had like a bathymetry layer below the dots, would you have to switch that off? Otherwise it would also get involved in the blending. Yeah, you would, because it will, well, the water, if that bathymetry was underneath the water layer isn't using any blending. So you wouldn't see anything underneath water. But okay. if the bathymetry was between these two layers, then dots would be blended with it. So you can apply blending modes to different, to multiple layers stacked on top of one another. It gets kind of complex, but sometimes you can find something that works. Right. Yeah. So the blending applies directly to the thing underneath. Right. To the layer underneath. Okay. So Quick Map Services is a good plugin for adding base maps. If you haven't used this, shows up in the web menu. Let me so here I can turn on like an OpenStreetMap standard map, or maybe I'll use Google Terrain. Okay. So if I use Google Terrain here, I am seeing, that underneath my dots layer right now because it's blended with it. And municipalities, is it?
but now I'm not seeing it because water is solid, municipalities is solid. If I put a blending mode on municipalities, then I'll see the Google terrain through municipalities, because this has the blending mode and this is what's beneath it.
Okay.
And in this case, dots has the blending mode and water is what's beneath it. But if there's multiple layers beneath it, you'll be able to see all of that, depending on how those features interact.
Okay, great.
So we're almost done, but as a kind of a segue towards next class, there's also a symbol layer type that I mentioned called geometry generator. And this is a really special one because it allows you to write an expression to specify how that geometry should be rendered. So for example, I could render municipalities as centroid points with a geometry generator expression of centroid. And there's another way to render coastlines. I have here, this might take a little while to render. I'm going to give that a second, but let me quickly show you. So here, if I duplicate this municipalities layer again, and I have a copy of it, and I'll rename this centroids. I can, for this version of municipalities, choose simple fill and change the symbol layer type to geometry generator. And here with this renderer, I choose what geometry I want that to be rendered as. So I choose point. And there is a geometry function called centroid. And it now renders those municipalities as the centroid of each polygon. So I'm now rendering those polygons as points as the centroid. So we're going to look at this next time, because this expression engine that you open up that we've looked at really quickly has a geometry section with a huge array of functions, such as centroid, which returns the basic geometry center. So there's all these crazy number of geometric functions in here that you can use with this renderer to create special things. Let me see if this is finished. So I've used that here to create these, what are they called? Exponential buffers off the coast. This is, you see this a lot on, maps made 100 years ago or so, older historic maps where you find the little concentric rings. It works really well for like against the edge of a lake, for example. And so this was done based on the municipalities, again, using an inverted polygon renderer, but using geometry generator. And there's much more complex expression to make this happen. And this also is this particular one is very processing heavy. It takes QGIS a long time to do it. So if you have a really complex data set, it may not work, but for small things like this area, it can be quite nice. So this is another way to do things. And I'll go ahead and I'll just paste this into the chat and we can talk about it next week. And all it's doing is using inverted polygons on a polygon layer, using the geometry generator expression, setting the geometry to line, and putting this expression in. This one has to be tweaked depending on the CRS you're using. It would be different if it was, this is in meters, and if you were using something that was in WGS 84 using degrees, this would not, you'd have to tweak this a bit to make it look right. But one example, and we're going to talk about these geometry generators in more detail in next week's class.
Sounds good.
So I will be, as soon as I post the class recording as an unlisted YouTube video, and I'll send you that link. And then I'll send you the assignment. It's going to be just having you turn in a couple screenshots of some of these tasks that we've gone through today. And along with that will be step-by-step instructions for everything I've shown and links to YouTube videos for each specific task too, so that you have all of that. And if you run into any difficulties with the data or anything, just email me and let me know. Get it straightened out.
Great. And yeah, we have a meeting next week, don't we?
Yes, we do. We have, I believe I set that for, let me double check here. Yeah, next Tuesday, the 29th at 1400 CET, Central European Time. Next Tuesday at 1400. And we, that's just a kind of an informal chat, so you can ask questions, share your screen. Something like that.
Great. Sounds
All
good.
right.
Yeah, well, no, that's been a super handy session. Looking forward to using some of the methods.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm so excited to try it now. I already have some ideas what I could use it for.
Oh,
But now I
that's
just
exciting.
need to ask all my colleagues for some data so I can actually like do something fun. So I'm not like redoing the same maps all the time. So
Yeah. And you can make yourself invaluable once they see your cool maps.
Exactly.
Okay.
They'll be surprised.
Cool.
Awesome. Thanks a lot for
All
the
right.
session. It was really interesting.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Thanks. Have a good day.
Yeah. You
Great.
too.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
All right.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Okay.
All right.
Bye.
Bye. Cheers. Bye.